That's really nice.
Once you watch this, I mean, I'm telling you, I feel so strongly about this that I really want to say.
I'll take, it might take 10 weeks.
No, that's more than trust me. See my face and be like,
speaking of storytelling, it sounds silly, but I saw it. I don't want to get it. I don't want to get killed for it. Is this like
crazy about that?
Oh,
now, what's the name?
Test, test, test. Test, 1, 2, test. Test, test, test. Test, test, test. 1, 2, test. Test, test. 1, 2, test, test.
Testing, 1, 2, 1, 2. Testing, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. 1, 2. Testing, 1, 2, 1, 2. Testing, 1, 2. 1, 2, 1, 2. Check, 1, 2. Check, 1, 2, 1, 2. Test, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Check, 1, 2. Check, 1, 2, 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 1, 2. Check, 1, 2. Check, 1, 2. Check, 1, 2. Check, mic, 1, 2. Check, mic, check, mic, check, mic. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Check, 1, 2.
Actually, my Leary boat.
Shall we have a panel?
Yes.
I think Sheila's sitting here, so I guess that leaves you there. I just want to make sure that everybody knows to pass. Two mics to pass when you talk. That would be John.
Okay, well,
Is that good?
Yeah, by process of elimination.
Pretty much what's left. All right. All right, good evening, everybody. I think we'll get started. Thank you very much for coming. My name is Sharon Bloyd-Peshkin, and I am a faculty member in the journalism department here at Columbia College Chicago. Thank you. And I want to welcome you all to Day 2 of Creative Nonfiction Week 2012. The theme this year is, for obvious reasons, it's political. And before I start, I want to also thank my fellow coordinators of this event, which is a joint effort between journalism, English, and the fiction writing departments. This year I worked very closely with Sam Weller from fiction writing, and Tom Narwaki, where are you? There you go, from the English department. I also want to thank our chairs, Randy Albers of Fiction, Ken Daly of English, and Nancy Day of Journalism for facilitating all of this. And thank for administrative support, Greg Baldino and Chris Richard. And you may notice a number of cameras and extra microphones and stuff around. I want to thank CAN TV for covering this event for cable and for online viewers. Information about CAN TV programming is at cantv.org. Tonight's event is called Election Night Coverage That Rocks. And it is hosted by Jim Derogatis, a full-time lecturer in the professional writing program. Jim is a full-time lecturer in the professional writing program of the English department at Columbia College. He's the author of 9 books. Together with Greg Cott of Chicago Tribune, he co-hosts Sound Opinions, the world's only rock and roll talk show. Before devoting himself to the devil's music, he was a beat and investigative reporter at the Jersey Journal, covering mobsters, corrupt politicians, and prison overcrowding, among many other things. Welcome.
Thank you.
And then we'll just move around from your left. Tom Burrell is the founder and chairman emeritus of Burrell Communications, a leading marketing communications firm noted for its expertise in reaching African American youth and urban market segments. An author and lecturer, he focuses on media, pop culture, social sciences, and American history. His first book, Brainwashed, Challenging the Myth of Black Inferiority, has sparked a lively international conversation on the powerful role media messaging plays in affecting attitudes and behaviors. Welcome, Tom. And next to him, we have John Schultz, the creator of the story workshop method of teaching reading and writing, and professor emeritus in fiction writing at Columbia College. His books include No One Was Killed, about the Democratic Convention in 1968, and The Chicago Conspiracy Trial, both reissued by the University of Chicago Press, with forewords by Todd Gitlin and afterwards by the author. And he's currently working on a book about Lyndon B. Johnson. Welcome. Next to John is Sheila Solomon, who has been a practicing journalist for 40 years. Her most recent position was cross-media editor for the Chicago Tribune, where she also managed the paper's internship and Metro training program. She's now an adjunct professor in the Columbia College Journalism Department and a volunteer in President Obama's national headquarters. This is only the second time since then that she can remember not being in a newsroom during a presidential election. She has interviewed Vice Presidents Dan Quayle and Al Gore, and was a part of the gathering of Chicago Tribune editors in December 2006 who met with then Senator Obama regarding his thoughts on running for president. Welcome, Sheila. Steve Rhodes is the owner, editor, and publisher of the Beachwood Reporter, a Chicago-centric online news and culture review. Prior to starting the Beachwood Reporter 7 years ago, Rhodes worked for newspapers and magazines for 20 years, including the Chicago Tribune, Newsweek, and Chicago Magazine, as well as small newspapers in Florida and Iowa. He was on the 1994 election night team at the Chicago Trib and covered the 1996 Democratic Convention in Chicago with the Newsweek contingent. And he says of 2008, nobody in the nation got Obama more right than I did. Nobody wanted to hear the truth, not the white-ringed truth, but the real truth about who Obama is and always has been, based on the record and real reporting separated from the awful imagination-based punditry. Welcome, Steve. And finally, Dominic Pacyga, professor of history in the Department of Humanities, History, and Social Sciences at Columbia College. He has authored or co-authored 5 books on Chicago history, including Chicago, a Biography, Polish Immigrants and Industrial Chicago, Chicago City of Neighborhoods, Chicago, a Historical Guide to the Neighborhoods, and Chicago's Southeast Side. He's lectured widely on a variety of topics, including urban development, labor history, immigration, and racial and ethnic relations. He's also consulted with numerous neighborhood organizations, student groups, and ethnic, labor, and fraternal organizations to preserve and exhibit their histories. Welcome, Dominic. We are at some point during this evening going to have some dramatic readings by students in our theater program. These were written and organized by Stephanie Shaw, a founding member of the solo performance ensemble Boy Girl, and a one-time neo-futurist, home to much political commentary, and a longtime senior lecturer in the theater department at Columbia College, who has now voted in a presidential election 7 times. And as results come in, I will be bringing those to Jim. I have a couple of students who are going to be texting me any interesting results as they come in. I'll bring those up and we'll share those with you. And with that, I'm going to get out of the way and we'll get on with it.
Thank you, Sharon. I figured they would not have tapped me to moderate this if they didn't want a certain amount of irreverence tonight. So I will start by telling my first and only story involving President Barack Obama. I was at the Sun-Times for the last 15 years before coming to Columbia 2 years ago. I was a rock critic, not a journalist. I started as a journalist out east in New Jersey, but I didn't have much chance to cover the president or the senator in his earlier role. It was during a Senate fundraiser, though, in Greektown, where he had the whole back room sold out. I was there for dinner with my wife. I got up to go to the bathroom, and I'm the only one in there, and in comes Barack Obama, then senator. And we're at adjoining urinals, and he says, "I read your column, I like it very much." It means a lot, but we didn't shake hands, you know what I mean? So we're merging here ungodly, just like the One Columbia plan: journalism, fiction, and creative nonfiction. I thought we'd start with the creative nonfiction part of the night and ask each of these panelists to tell an election story. It can be about this election, it can be about the last election, it can be about an election that has nothing to do with this. But to give you guys a sense, we have some journalists, we have some longtime veteran political observers. Dom, you remember, you go back to like Lincoln, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I went to high school with Lincoln.
I thought so, yeah. To give a little bit of a sense of your election night memories. Do you want to lead off, Dom?
Well, as a historian, I have to look to the past. And in 1856, that's pretty far in the past, Chicago had an election. And I'm just talking about the Chicago way of electing people. You understand? That's become an issue with some people like John Cass, et cetera, saying that Barack Obama is part of this whole Chicago corrupt conspiracy, you know, kind of thing.
The only people who've mentioned the Chicago machine more this year than you are the Republicans.
That's right. Exactly, exactly. So John Cass would probably, if he were here, love this story. In 1856, Bridgeport was still a suburb of the city of Chicago. And the Chicago Tribune reported that never before, and perhaps never again, would so many Hibernians, Irish, come across the river and vote illegally in a Chicago election. Supposedly in the ward across the street, across the river, which would be Pilsen today, 500 extra voters voted. So there wasn't the kind of check your ID kind of thing going on. And of course, people in 1956 simply came in and said, I vote for him, or I vote for her, I vote for Smith, or I vote for Jones, and they put a bean in the bucket, you know. A few years later, after Bridgeport had joined the city of Chicago, the Tribune recounted that, well, now the Democrats run the city because they have Bridgeport, and 500 extra people vote in Bridgeport, and 500 extra people vote throughout the river wards. It has been long known in the Kennedy election of 1960 that supposedly the river ward votes were weighed, they weren't counted. And the river wards, of course, went for Jack Kennedy. And also various kinds of lies and deceits about Chicago politics, which we all know are not true. But nevertheless, the Chicago way has been a way for a good long time.
Have you been watching Copper on BBC America?
No.
Any of you guys seen that? It's a really good series set at the end of the Civil War in New York that follows police officers, and they had a great election for mayor where it was, 2 shots of whiskey for everybody who voted once, and then 3 shots when you voted subsequent times.
Well, on the south side, back before 1920 or so, we had 2 aldermen per ward, so that was extra special. Today we'd have 100 aldermen. There was a fellow down in the back of the yards who was Mrs. O'Leary's son, Big Jim O'Leary, who had a tavern, a restaurant, and a massage parlor. And behind the Stockyard hardware store, he ran a gambling den. And he was, of course, known as the political boss of that ward at that time. So, they used to call the city council the club of funeral directors and tavern owners, because funeral directors and tavern owners knew everybody in the neighborhood. One of them was saying, I'm sorry for your loss, and the other was saying, sure, I'll buy you one.
All right, we got some results coming in. West Virginia and Kentucky have gone to Romney, and Vermont to Obama. No surprises there. Virginia and Ohio are what we're waiting for. I think we'll still be waiting about 2 weeks from now. Steve, but before you answer the question of a good election story, I have to point out Steve wrote a phenomenal piece about Jesse Jackson Jr. In Chicago Magazine last month.
Yes.
It's up online.
Thank you, yes.
A really good piece of reporting, trying to get behind what the heck is happening there. Not insensitive to him, but like, what's up? And how is he going to win tonight with no opposition, hardly, that's real, and hasn't been on the job in, as long as Kirk.
Well,
who we don't pick on.
Right.
But he had a good excuse.
Well, as I wrote in the piece, this being Chicago, Jesse Jr. can win tonight from a jail cell or a hospital bed. He but there's a difference between him and Mark Kirk, and the difference is that the Kirk team hasn't conducted a series of lies and obfuscations about what's been going on. You know, we've had medical reports, and as Jim said, I'm not insensitive to someone suffering from something like bipolar disease and that sort of thing, but there's been so much misdirection by the people around the congressman, and we have yet to even get the name of a real doctor. Typically in these cases, doctors put their names to statements or come out and have press conferences. So the whole thing has been shrouded in such mystery that that's what's really kind of kicked up the dust about this, and why it may seem like he's getting treated more harshly than Mark Kirk.
It's always the cover-up that gets you, not the crime.
It is. If they would just be straight about it, I think people would show a lot of patience, frankly. But he has no real opposition, so he'll be reelected.
Well, give us a good election story, Steve.
Well, okay, the one I was thinking of was I was at the Tribune as a what they called then, I don't know if they still do, a residency, which means super long internship, right? That's what it meant when I was there. I was there for a year and a half doing this, and on the 1994 midterm elections, I was assigned to write the Illinois Congressional Delegation Roundup, and that was the night that Dan Rostenkowski was turned out by voters, and he was under indictment at the time. It really shouldn't have been a surprise to anyone. Tribune editors apparently weren't reading their own paper because they were shocked. And when it became apparent that he was going to lose his seat, you know, the 5 or 6 of us on the Maine election team were called into an editor's office. It was actually the office of the guy who's now the editor of the whole paper, Jerry Kern. And, you know, I was really excited. You know, I was, you know, I was coming to the end of my time at the Tribune, but it was exciting to work in my first major metropolitan newsroom, and here I was going to be able to write this story and be a part of the Chicago history, and I just thought this was the greatest thing. And, you know, Rostenkowski was a crook. There was no two ways about it. And I go into this meeting, and everyone, it was like someone had died in there. The Tribune editors were so upset, and it was, oh, Rusty, Danny, and I was just like going like, what? I was just, and finally I spoke up. I was like, is this great or what? You know, like, and I was like, you know, the guy was under indictment. I think I read it in your paper, and you know, the Kern actually said, oh, some people think that those charges are chicken. I don't know what you can say on canned TV.
Oh, fuck, they wouldn't have invited me if you couldn't say chicken shit.
Like, this is chicken shit. Some people think those charges are chicken shit and this, that, and the other thing. And I was just like, wow. I mean, I thought there were going to be tears rolling down the eyes of these people. And that was that. And we decided what the coverage was going to be and went back to our places. But it just, to me, it kind of showed how invested some newsrooms can become in politicians, how friendly they can be with them. The Tribune had a managing editor for 16 years who was very good friends with Rostenkowski, and later, I think he may have been a spokesman for him or wrote a book, or, you know, and later did so with some other unsavory figures, like if anyone's familiar with the late Don Stevens of Rosemont. And actually, I'm trying to think of who was just in the...
Alleged mobster, Don Stevens.
Alleged mobster, and someone that was just in the news, I can't think of that. He's also Bill Cellini, the king of clout in Illinois, who just got sent to prison, and this former managing editor of the Tribune is his spokesman. And so it makes you wonder about some of these relationships in the newsroom and how it might have influenced coverage or non-coverage.
Well, this is a good segue to Sheila, because Sheila, if you... No. No, you know, I've been a fan of your work and of the people you've mentored at the Tribune for years. And yet, ironically, if you were still working at the Tribune tonight, you would not be able to be here because you are not a human being who is allowed to have a political opinion if you work for the Tribune. I am married to a woman who works at the Tribune. I can't have a bumper sticker on our car or in my house. She put an I voted button up last year in her cubicle, and they scolded her. Not an I voted for whom, but an I voted. And yet you can be pals with the alleged mobsters and indicted politicians if you're at a certain level. So we're glad to have you here. I just got to ask about the intellectual discrepancy of having interviewed Quayle and Gore. That's got to be a hell of a dichotomy.
It was. I was working at the Charlotte Observer then, but that's not the story I wanted to tell.
No. I just had to make a joke.
But yes,
it's been so long we got to joke at Quayle's expense.
Does anyone out here remember Quayle?
Oh yeah.
But not the younger people. Yeah. The story I wanted to tell has to do with why I've always been interested in politics, even though I'd never covered it a lot. Everywhere I've been, I've written something about it, but mostly I've done other things in the newsroom. But I'm a native Virginian, and I remember as a second grader the conversations that took place around the dinner table at my house, because about that time, and that would have been in the late 50s, yes, in the late 50s, voter suppression was very much an issue then, even though it wasn't called that at that time. So in my house, my grandmother lived with us during the winter months. And I remember that she was just getting access to voting, but she was afraid to vote. Recognize that story from what's happening today? My mom and dad, both professionals, trying to help her to understand the importance of it. And of course she did understand the importance of it, but she was still intimidated. She was from a very rural area, and they were going to drive her back to this little place in Virginia to vote. And she was afraid to do it. She did eventually vote. And I just remember those conversations. And I remember also that my parents voted in the elementary school that I attended. And the morning that they voted, I happened to be walking into the school building, and my dad was dropping my mom off, and he was going to go park the car. And I still remember how my schoolmates reacted when they saw my mother, professional African American, she was a school teacher and on her way to work, how they reacted to how she looked, which was how most school teachers looked back then, I believe. You know, wearing a dress and heels and carrying a purse, and don't think she had gloves, but she may have. I honestly don't remember. So those are the things that have, I still remember today, and I remember that even more, or have been remembering it even more the last few days as I've helped the volunteers at the Obama headquarters to deal with some of the phone calls that we've been receiving.
That's scary stuff. And I've seen a lot of stories already today, including from Virginia, which is going to be key tonight about trouble at the polls all day.
I know.
John, recall for us a great election story.
Well, the one that I will recall will be one about Lyndon Johnson. And Johnson was first congressman from Texas, obviously pretty young congressman too. He'd been a school teacher for a couple of years after graduating from San Marcos, the state teachers college at that time, now the University of Texas at San Marcos. And he taught a couple of years in the Rio Grande area of Texas, and somehow the Rio Grande area, in college he tended to be supported by the minorities, and in the elections he tended also to be supported by the minorities, and he deliberately sought the African-American vote and so forth. This was Texas. And of course, this Texas, southern Texas, at a time when it was a solid Democratic South, and the main election, as in Chicago, I might say, was in the primary, not in the general election, and was hard fought very frequently. There's another story I have about Mayor Daley and Benjamin Adamowski. But in this case, Johnson came to the point, he became, FDR befriended him, actually acted as sort of a mentor to him. He somehow was attracted to something about Lyndon Johnson. And then in pictures were taken with the two of them, and then in 1941, in an off-year election, Johnson tried to run for the Senate in Texas against Pappy Leo Daniels, who was a famous figure. So Daniels was really drawing most of his votes from the East Texas area around Houston and Galveston and up and down that area, which is where the major wealth of Texas was located. And Johnson was drawing his main support from the Rio Grande area. And then, as they say in the song, the rest of Texas was a mess. So he had a strategy that Johnson did, that he was going to release the votes from the Rio Grande counties early in order to sort of overwhelm anything that might happen in the East Texas counties. Well, that didn't work at all. Pappy Leo Daniels, he and his campaign team held back the votes in the East Texas counties, and Johnson had exhausted his, and so Pappy Lee's people knew how many votes they needed. This is sort of like what happens often here in Cook County and DuPage County. I think DuPage has got particularly good at it in the recent elections. And and Johnson it was done. And so Pappy Leo Daniels' people managed to find enough votes, and Johnson was denied the Senate seat, which he had sought. And it was the first election, only election he really lost. Well, FDR turned around to him when he got back to Washington and kidded him quite a bit and said, "Lyndon, the first thing they taught us up in New York was to sit on the ballot boxes." So, well, 8 years later, Johnson got another crack at the Senate. And again, it was going to be fought out in the primary, and this time between him and Coke Stevenson. Both of these opponents are major figures in Texas. And Johnson again was depending on the Rio Grande counties. And the vote was so close that it had to go to the courts. And the courts, it kept going back to the courts. And from the spring of the primary on through the summer, they had just one time after another, they had to go back. And the courts even said they were getting tired of this case. And then came the issue of where are they going to find something, anything, and they didn't. Well, there was a Mexican, they called him a Mexican boss in those days. He would be called a Latino boss now. And he, in a town called Alice. And he was known as a strong Lyndon supporter. He was also known as someone who pretty much played by his own rules and not by the state party rules. And somehow he found a box of votes. It's called Box 13 in an attic of the election headquarters, in an attic. And Box 13 had some 207, I believe, uncounted votes in it. And after they counted them, Lyndon Johnson was ahead by 87 votes. And whatever history is said about him, he awarded himself the nickname of Landslide Lyndon. And it was, well, Coke Stevenson didn't accept that. And they went back to court again, but this time the court was really tired of the whole case, and they gave it to Lyndon Johnson.
Seems like they gave it more consideration than the Supreme Court gave Gore v. Bush.
Citizens United or
Florida?
Florida?
Citizens United or Gore v. Bush, the last election stolen by the court.
Yeah. That's
All right.
Well, there's another one about Daley. And
Hang on to it for later.
okay.
Tom, one more story, and then I got to start asking some journalistic type questions.
Well, you can start asking some different kind of questions right now, because one of the things that distinguishes me here is that I'm not a journalist.
Yeah.
And I don't have any inside stories about elections, but I do have some outside stories and some outside concerns.
Well, I got a note from you about some things you were eager to talk about, and one of them is the concept of the big lie. Now, from my perspective as a disappointed journalist at this point, disappointed by the quality of journalism we've gotten over the last 15 or 20 years, I was at least a little bit encouraged by the amount of political fact-checking given to all the debates and many of the speeches in this campaign, which was a little bit, this much improvement. But you're saying, as I read it, the big lie, you know, the bolder, the brasher the lies, often coming from the right, most often coming from the right, the bigger they were, the less anybody followed up on them.
I'm actually, you know, I actually have concern about some character issues with the Republican candidate, and it's not about republicanism or policy, but it's about character. But I have a bigger concern about the populace, the people who go out and vote. And a lot of my concern actually comes out of what I do for a living. I mean, I'm in the business of marketing to people and understanding, you know, human dynamics, what makes people tick and what makes people buy things. And part of it is what makes people buy lies.
Often against their own interests, right?
Yeah. Here's my issue and my problem. Take the issues of voter suppression, outright, in your face, race baiting, race hating rhetoric. Duplicity, I mean, saying one thing one day with videotape and saying the opposite thing the next day with videotape. And it's not flip-flopping, because flip-flopping is when you say, I had this opinion, but now I have that opinion. What it is now is, I never had that opinion. But wait a minute, yeah. It's on videotape. No, I didn't have this videotape. So basically what it's saying is that I can tell you anything, and if I tell you with enough consistency, enough repetition, then that becomes the truth. We're talking, I noticed in the piece we handed out, we're talking about stances. In all of the media coverage, you take lying, you take these abrupt, in-your-face lies, abrupt turnarounds, and the race-based. It seems to me that that is an issue that really affects who we are as a country. Whether we have somebody who can actually do that is one thing. The idea that disturbs me more than anything else, whether Romney wins or loses, Obama wins or loses, is that there may be 47, 48% of our population who are willing to countenance that and say it's okay.
Yeah.
And by doing so, they are encouraging that as a new norm. And saying this is the way that we can do it. And the thing about lying is that you gentlemen who've been, ladies who've been around the journalism for a while, I mean, lying used to be something that politicians could do in private. I mean, you could, on a whistle, stop and lie to some people in a village, and, you know, it wouldn't get. You know, it was like what said in Vegas stays in Vegas. You know, I mean, it wouldn't travel. But now, if you take lying and technology and put them together, there are only two ways to lie. Well, there are only two things to do. One is don't lie, because it's there on videotape, immediately seen, or say, I know that the cameras are on, I know that this is going to be transmitted in real time, but I'm going to lie anyway. And I'm going to bet that the public is going to buy it. And I bet that the media is going to overlook it. How can you have a discussion about positions, or in this case, talking about stances, in the context of questionable character? Because if you take a stance, what difference does it make what he says a stance is if you know that he's capable of lying about it openly? So I guess in one way, I would like people to tell me how to reconcile this, because I'm having, you know, I'm sitting, I'm watching Joe Scarborough, and I'm sitting here at the panel, and I'm trying to enjoy myself. And I can't just seem to get around to enjoying myself, because to me, I watched elections going all the way back to Dewey versus Truman. You know, where, you know, Dewey wins and the Chicago Tribune.
Another good night for the Tribune.
Yeah, right. You know,
wonderful.
I have never witnessed anything like this before. I've never, yeah, please.
Can I jump in? This is on. Can I jump in? You know, I hear what you're saying, and I agree with what you're saying, but I'm really disturbed by hearing that from one side of this campaign. And I'm not on the other side. I'm not on any side. But we all know what you're talking about, because it did get so much coverage. But if you think that the Obama campaign hasn't lied their ass off, you're really missing something. I mean, I could go down a laundry list.
Okay. Let's start with the racial stuff. Let's start with the racial stuff.
That's different than lying. But if you...
Oh, okay. Well, it's different. So does that...
Wait, no.
So does that excuse it?
Talk about two different things.
I know, but does that excuse it? Let's just talk about race thing.
Yeah. Well, okay. I'm not disputing that.
Okay.
That's not what I'm talking about.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Okay. But I mean, do you think that the Obama campaign has been telling the truth? I mean, about all, do you think that, I mean, it's not Barack Obama lied about Tony Rezko in 2008 to the newspaper's editorial boards. And it's irrefutable. You can look it up. He went a long time saying that he had no idea that this guy was under federal investigation. He comes under a lot of heat. He goes before the editorial boards and says, oh yeah, I knew all about that, and I called him because I was concerned about that. And the coverage the next day was about how great it was that he came clean about everything, instead of that he had been lying his ass off. Lynn Sweet compiled all the lies that he made to the network news shows that year about that, among other things. I just read a story about how misleading his answers were on The Daily Show about warrantless spying and the mass surveillance that's going on in his administration. The civilian drone deaths, he gave an interview, worse to me than Romney's 47% on video, is Barack Obama saying about the civilian drone deaths overseas that, oh, it's not like there's all that many innocent civilians being killed. I mean, first, that's so incredibly cavalier, especially for a guy who's got a Nobel Peace Prize. And second, yeah, there's like 1,000 civilian drone deaths. So, I mean, you know, the Obama campaign did a very smart thing. This was really David Axelrod. During the Republican primary, they spent hundreds of millions of dollars starting to demonize Mitt Romney. Now, I don't like Mitt Romney, and I don't support him, but I'm a journalist, and my job is to see things clearly all the way around. And so I'm not sure if it's even on.
Well, let me get, while we switch mics, let me get Tom's response to that in 1 minute, but I've been sitting on this news for a couple of minutes. According to the Associated Press, Indiana has gone for Romney and Illinois for Obama. Now, no surprise there either. Yeah, no surprise.
So Ann Coulter's wrong about Illinois. Didn't she say Illinois was going for Romney? Or was that Dick Morris?
No, she lied, but she'll deny that she did lie.
Our neighbor will be very upset.
Tom, is this lying problem as big a problem on both sides? Are we getting it from both? I know, I've been following PolitiFact really closely, and they do catch Romney more often than Obama, but they have caught Obama. Steve is right.
Well, let me just say this. It's a bigger issue than even politics. I'm in the business where I'm watching cultural change. And what I'm seeing is sliding down a kind of going over a moral cliff here, where lying is the new norm. And it's okay, because one of the things that was said after the first, the debate where Romney just sat there and just reversed his position on everything, there was a kind of dismissal. Okay, well, he lied about it. Oh, yeah, that is true. But he actually did perform very well. Okay, that was the response. But there is a general kind of, whether you're talking about is it delivery or is it DiGiorno? Whether you're talking about, Mom, have you seen my green sweater? The Tide commercial. Whether it is about the dog on the treadmill when he's supposed to be going out for a walk, or the post office picking the thing up, and she's saying, "Well, I'm going to go to the post office." This whole idea of normalizing this whole thing is one thing. We're going in that direction, and I'm not going to deny that lying is a part of politics. I'm talking about lying in the whole context of the whole pattern of this candidate, and there's a general means by which, if you list 4 things that are problems, which develops a composite. And then the counter argument becomes, you pick out one of those things and you say that person does it too. That's not an equivalent to me, because without all these other factors, then we wouldn't even be having this discussion about that particular point.
Let's let John and Tom jump in.
What?
John, you had something.
Okay, I wondered, you include a reversal of position in lying?
Yes.
You do?
Yes.
Well, what about when Jefferson switched his position? He was against expansion when he...
Oh, he was a liar.
He definitely was, and he turned around and he bought the Louisiana Purchase.
Right. Well, there was an interesting talk.
It turned out to be the biggest expansionist move ever made.
There was an interesting talk on NPR this morning with 4 of the greatest authors of Lincoln biographies. And they were talking about, all of them agreed. They agreed on nothing else except the point that Lincoln was the rare politician who would come out and say, "I was wrong, I have changed my mind." Today we would call that a flip-flopper. The difference is no one ever says they were wrong or that they changed their mind. It's like, you didn't understand me the first time. And they said this was one of Lincoln's strengths. Events were moving so quickly in the Civil War, and things were so complicated, so many challenges he faced, that he never hesitated to say, "I was wrong, I changed my mind."
Well, he asked his cabinet, "Do I have the right to go to war against the Confederacy?" They said no, and he said the vote is 6-1, and the ayes have it. So that's. I was going to ask about the Resco thing.
Lincoln didn't run as a. Did Lincoln lie when he ran? He didn't run as an abolitionist.
No.
And so, to me, that's the biggest Lincoln lie of all, really, unless he really wasn't an abolitionist. And then him not be, well, doesn't that kind of change the way we think about him then? Because that's always bothered me.
I think what you have to understand is that when you're running for office, it's one point in your life, and when you're in office is another point of life. You mentioned Jefferson. Jefferson was suddenly, had the opportunity to double the size of the United States, and he took it. Small government Jefferson did not want, the same thing with Lincoln. Lincoln was not an abolitionist, but once he was confronted with a civil war, the one way to win the Civil War was the Emancipation Proclamation, and you get a lot of black soldiers into the Union Army. and they needed those black soldiers in the Union Army. But lying in politics is a long-established American tradition. And as a traditionalist, I really don't want to do away with these things, you know. But it is key. It's a long-established tradition. And in fact, in American society, I saw an ad for Chef Boyardee talking about its fresh tomato sauce last night. I grew up with Chef Boyardee. I served with Chef Boyardee. Chef Boyardee, you are no tomato sauce. You know, so I see this in advertising all the time. And you can't imagine that American politicians are going to be any better than Americans. How many of us lie to our wives? You know, I hate to say that, but, you know, it's true. So, indeed, you know, what was interesting was, of course, the actual truth that Romney's handler said a couple of weeks ago. He said, well, once we win the primary, it's like an Etch-a-Sketch. We'll just shake it and we'll do something else. And that's, God damn it, what he did. He shook it and it's something else.
Sheila, you know, I don't want to romanticize the history of journalism. I mean, the standards that existed until maybe 10 years ago were only dated back to the Spanish-American War. You know, when Hearst wanted a war, he kicked one up, right? Have we fallen short as journalists? I mean, Steve is saying we have, and I believe we have. Are we, you know, in this pretense to be fair and objective, you know, as Fox, they co-opted the very words. We bend over backwards not to call a lie sometimes.
Well, true, and not only that, but as we think about what journalism once was, maybe we're kind of headed that way again, but what it once was very much advocacy in a way that we have been taught, certainly I was taught 40 years ago, not to practice journalism. But we, as I said, we may be headed right back that way, and not only Fox.
Yeah.
MSNBC.
Yeah. Exactly.
The other side. Yeah, they started out on the conservative.
Correct. But what is wrong with obtaining more information and changing your mind because you have more information than you had before. So you are actually seeing something differently now because of your perspective, because of your experience. What's wrong with that? To me, the only thing that's wrong with it is you're not owning up to that being
it's the owning up, yes,
for doing it. And as journalists, we're not challenging you to tell us that's what happened.
Mm-hmm.
But let me ask the question. In this world of the internet, aren't facts checked a lot faster than they ever were before? I mean, can't you just get on there and punch a couple of things and say, wait a minute, he said this 2 weeks ago, he's saying this now. I have a feeling that we're going through a sea change in journalism. I mean, I don't just mean the print journalism, I mean journalism in general, where we are able to look at stuff much more quickly than we could in 1956, 1966, 1986, 2006. You can Google what did Romney say or what did Obama say right now. And you can find it pretty much.
Yeah, but it presumes, Dom, that people care and that they aren't stupid.
Well,
did you miss where I said Indiana voted for Romney? You know, it's a blue-collar, working-class state that struggles to pay for health insurance, that struggles for jobs, and they just voted for the guy who represents the 1%.
But Indiana, the northwest part of Indiana, will vote for Obama. And that's the state that you're talking about. But the rest of the state has a southern tradition that has always voted and first as conservative Democrats, and then as conservative Republicans. The southern part of Illinois has traditionally been settled by people from the South, where our part of Illinois, the northern part of Illinois, is settled by the Yankees. And there's always been this division between the two states and between Indiana.
It's true. As a New York-born person, I get really scared when I go to southern Illinois.
Absolutely. As a Chicago-born person, if I get south of 138th Street, I get scared. And I'm a South Sider, and I like the South Side, but past 138th Street, I'm shivering in my boots.
All right, we've got to take a break for the theater folks to do their thing. I think that's going to inspire us with some great concession speeches and I guess acceptance speeches. It's only 8 minutes, and then we're going to come back, and then I think we should throw it out to the crowd and ask them what they would like to hear you speak to. We don't have any other results yet, but Stephanie's going to bring up her people.
let me just explain what's going to happen, and then we're going to use this, okay? Hi, everybody. Thanks for having us. I'm Stephanie Shaw. I'm a senior lecturer over in the theater department, and I was charged with finding election night victory speeches, which what I discovered was, first of all, there's no real historical precedent for them. The earliest one I could find, with the help of our excellent librarians here, was Dwight D. Eisenhower. Yeah, so before then, the guys just said, okay, thanks, and went to work, I suppose. So what you're going to hear here tonight from my lovely performers is a compilation of election night snippets, verbatim. Every word you hear, you can document, and if you want to come up to me afterwards, I can tell you who said what. But I think it's much more fun for you all to guess who said what. And to help me out, I have Michael, Natalie, Jared, and Ted. And I'm going to arrange them, and we'll get started. Thank you. Come on up here, guys. So you're going to use this. Crowd around. You heard it's not very live, okay? And Ted, whoosh in. That's it. They all want to look at you. Go for it.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you all.
My fellow Americans, thank you for
being here. The good evening, my fellow Americans.
Ladies and gentlemen, I didn't realize so many of you would still be up so late.
I am indeed as humble as I am proud.
I am more grateful than I can say.
I am humbled by the trust and confidence of my fellow citizens.
I am indeed as humble as I am proud of the decision that...
Let me just say, first of all, this has been, well, there's never been a more humbling moment in my life, not only humbled by the extent of what has happened tonight,
that the American people have made.
America has spoken.
The American people have voted.
The people have spoken.
The decision that the American people have made.
The people.
The people.
The people.
Earlier this evening, I spoke on the phone with President Carter. The president pledged the utmost...
Just received a very gracious call from Senator McCain. He...
Cooperation in the transition that will take place in these coming months.
Fought long and hard in this campaign, and he's fought even longer for the country he loves.
As I say, the president was most gracious about this.
I had a good visit with Senator Dole. I applauded the campaign.
I have received a very gracious message from the vice president and also had a telephone conversation with him.
And congratulated him for his gallant and courageous fight.
This evening, I received a gracious call.
Earlier today, Senator Kerry called.
From the vice president, we agreed.
With his congratulations, we had a really good phone call.
We agreed to do our best to heal our country after this hard-fought...
Very gracious. Senator Kerry waged a spirited campaign, and he and his supporters can be proud of their efforts.
Contest.
I just received a telephone call from Governor Dukakis, who was most gracious. His call was personal. It was genuinely friendly, and it was in the great tradition of American politics.
I have received the following wire from Vice President Nixon. In the wire, he says, I want to repeat through this wire the congratulations and best wishes I extended to you on television last night. I know that you will have united support of all Americans as you lead the nation in the cause of peace and freedom during the next 4 years.
A campaign is a disagreement, and disagreements divide. But an election is a decision, and decisions clear the way for harmony and peace. And now I know we'll come together as we always have.
We must put politics behind us and work together to make the promise of America available for every one of our citizens.
Now, I know America wants reconciliation and unity. I know Americans want progress, and we must seize this moment and deliver.
Together, guided by a spirit of common sense, common courtesy, and common goals, we can unite and inspire the American citizens.
We have worked hard to end the politics of who's to blame, and instead to ask, What are we going to do to make America better?
Let us resist the temptation to fall back on the same partisanship and pettiness and immaturity that has poisoned our politics for so long.
And our nation must rise above a house divided.
I think it's time to tap the tremendous strength and vitality and idealism and hope and patriotism and a sense of brotherhood and sisterhood in this country to unify this nation, to make it great once more.
Now, I saw many signs in this campaign. Some of them were not friendly. Some were very friendly. But the one that touched me the most was the one I saw in Deshler, Ohio, at the end of a long day of whistle stopping. It was almost impossible to see, but a teenager held up a sign, "Bring us together." And that will be the great objective of this administration at the outset, to bring the American people together.
And perhaps the most important thing of all, to bring our people together as never before so that diversity can be a source of strength in a world that is ever smaller, where everyone counts and everyone is a part of America's family.
It is time to put country ahead of party.
You know, Abe Lincoln said...
Abraham Lincoln.
Thomas Jefferson.
Abraham Lincoln.
Jefferson.
I had a conversation today with Mrs. Eisenhower. She, of course, was pleased with the result, and she says the general is elated.
I recognize clearly the weight of the responsibilities that you have placed upon me, and I assure you that I will never, in my service in Washington, give short weight to those responsibilities.
To all Americans, I say the next 4 years are going to be difficult and challenging years for all of us. I think that there's general agreement by all of our citizens that a supreme national effort will be needed in the years above to move this country safely through the 1960s.
I would only hope that in these next 4 years, we can so conduct ourselves in this country and so meet our responsibilities in the world in building peace in the world, that years from now, people will look back to the generation of the 1970s at how we conducted ourselves, and they will say, God bless America.
It is a clarion call to face the challenges of the end of the Cold War and the beginning of the next century.
It's not going to be easy for any of us. I don't claim to know all the answers, but I'm not afraid to take on the responsibilities of President of the United States, because my strength and my courage and my advice and my counsel and my criticism comes from you. And if I can tap the greatness that is in you and in the American people, we can make our nation's government a great and a source of pride once again.
I am not frightened by what lies ahead. And I don't believe the American people are frightened by what lies ahead. Together, we're going to do what has to be done. We're going to put America back to work again.
In 4 historic years, I'm proud to lead such an amazing country, and I'm proud to lead it forward.
I can assure you that every degree of mind and spirit that I possess will be devoted to the long-range interests of the United States and the cause of freedom around the world.
Now, I'd like to thank my family, my wife, without whom I would not be here tonight, and who...
The fact is, I'd be nothing without them. Our 4 sons, our daughter, and my own Barbara Bush. I guess I shouldn't...
I believe will be one of the greatest first ladies in the history of the Republic.
Say she's my own anymore, for soon she'll be the first lady of all the United States.
Laura's the love.
My best friend for the last 16 years, the rock of my life, and the love
of my life,
our generation's next First Lady.
Well, and speaking of Nancy, she's going to have a new title in a couple of months.
Michelle Obama.
And, well, it isn't really a new title because she's been the First Lady in my life for a long time.
I want to thank my wife.
My wife, who...
And our daughters for their love.
Has endured more speeches than ever in the press, than members of the press, and you know how tired you get of them.
Laura's active involvement as First Lady of Texas has made Texas a better place, and she will be a wonderful First Lady of America.
It takes a real trooper to hear the same speech over and over again for 21 years and act as if it's the first time each time.
So now my wife and I prepare for a new administration and for a new baby. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks you. God bless.
Very much.
Thank you, and may bless the United States of America.
Thank you. Good night, and God bless.
I thank God for the faith He's given me.
America.
And remember, a great philosophy is never one without defeat. It is always one without fear. What is important is that a man,
thank you, and God bless.
Or a woman engage in the battle, enter the arena.
God bless.
Participate.
America.
Yeah. They even cleaned up after themselves. Look at that.
Unlike the president.
Unlike the president. As a card-carrying atheist, all that God bless America stuff always makes my skin crawl, I tell you. Sharon, is that mic working? Is that the one for the crowd? So we can take some questions? Is it? Okay.
Let's find out.
Where'd the audio guys go? You know, real quick, right down the row, I was going to start with this. We don't have any more results in yet. Call it for tonight or tomorrow or 3 weeks from now, if you had to predict. Tom? Obama? John?
Well, Sam Weller asked me that question a few weeks ago. Oh, the mic. Sam, are you there? Yes. No, he isn't. He asked me that question three or 4 weeks ago. I said at that time I thought it would be very close in the popular vote, but Obama would win the electoral vote by considerable.
Sheila?
Obama.
Obama. 2 weeks ago, I would have said Romney, Obama by 305 electoral votes.
But it'll come down to the Electoral College.
Yeah, it's going to be very close in the popular vote, but it's going to be Obama.
Is this good for America, Dom, these close elections of the last decade and a half?
I think what it shows is how divided we really are, and we're divided over a principal question. The principal question is, what is the role of government in society? Is it to have a positive role? Is government a good thing, or is government a bad thing? 47% of us think it's a good thing. 47% of us think it's a bad thing. And the other 6% win the elections.
I love this 6%. You know, there was a great riff that Bill Maher did about the undecideds, who we've heard so much about. And we're still hearing about them now as the polls close. And Bill Maher said, you know who the undecideds are? He said that Kim Kardashian had tweeted that she was undecided, and also the Octomom had not made up her mind. These are the, like, what rock are you living under that you haven't decided?
Great segue, because as someone who's been working in a campaign office for almost 6 months now and dealing with lots of people in the public, and each day, especially in the last month, seeing how the public seems to get ramped up, it brought back to mind the many, many, many conversations I've been a part of in the 5 newspapers I've worked for, where we talked about how to get the public engaged. We still have not figured that out. And 2 nights ago, and I'm not exaggerating when I tell you this, we were getting frantic, or phone calls from people who were frantic about what they could do to help. Today, people were calling because they didn't even know their polling places. Today's election day. Did we just announce it's election day?
There's people who don't even know there's an election today.
Well, there is that too. I'm afraid we've talked to some of them also.
We just discovered that Louis Gutierrez is our new congressman. He was Lipinski. So that was actually, I have to confess, a fairly pleasant discovery.
Well, Sharon has got the other mic work. I'm sorry, John. Sharon's got the other mic working. So you want to play Donahue, Sharon, and throw it out to people who have questions? Who's got a question? There you go, Sharon. Oh, there you go.
Hi. I had a question. So, regards, like, definitely we've been talking about political issues, but obviously these are all social issues. And my concern has to do with how competitive we are as a society. And obviously we see like a huge amount of money. Like, what is it, $5.7 billion that was spent on both sides for this campaign? And I mean, that's just a small detail out of how competitive our nature is. I want to know, it's definitely a strength of being American, right? Like, that's who we are. We love competition and we've strived off of it. But clearly it's a weakness too. Do you think that this is part of our downfall? Do you think that this is something that I should be concerned about? I want your thoughts on competition.
The horse race aspect of all this.
Is it about the downfall of America, did you said?
Yeah.
The youth?
Ultimate downfall.
Well, youth have far more power than they think they have. And for the people in this room, you better take the issue of student aid under serious consideration. And there may be some facts that you really don't know, or don't know as well as you should. If you find people who 20 years later are still paying heavily on their student loans, things of that sort. There are other countries in this world who are, they pay for the whole thing. When Betty and I were teaching at Fudan University in Shanghai, the student, this is the Yale of the Chinese university system. Those students, they had to win their place on the national tests, but they came from everywhere in China, and their way was being paid. And that has to make a huge difference, and it makes a huge difference in Germany, and it makes a huge difference in France. And look at the education for just the primary and secondary levels. This is our country's, we think we're the first. We're way out of that. And we're going to pay a price for that. We're going to pay a terrible price for that. And that is, I like one thing Jill Stein said when she said, she was asked as a doctor, why are you running for president? And she said, most of the medical problems are political problems. So I just to one part of your question anyway, youth have far more power than they think.
I am sick of seeing Tammy Duckworth's face.
She lost a bunch of limbs. Give her a break.
I understand. And Walsh, what is his Walsh?
Yeah.
Right? As a Democrat, I've blocked him. But you know, I mean, I am sick and tired of the amount of money that has been spent on a congressional district in the state of Illinois that I don't even have to vote for, but I have to listen to them 20 times a night. That money, if it was spent on students, could send you all to Columbia College for free. And your cousins. And your parents could go back to college. This is ridiculous. The kinds of money that we spend in this country because we're competitive? No, it's because big business and big money is trying to buy this election. And it's trying to buy it for the Democrats as well as for the Republicans. Don't think it's only the Republicans. There's a lot of big money on the Democratic side. It's a waste of money. It's stupid. But we had to do what the Swiss do. It's what, $200,000 they can spend on a campaign, and that's about it?
They're socialists.
Well, they may be socialists.
It's a bad
They're a lot
thing.
smarter. They had to take, look, they want to throw away billions of dollars. They had to give it to these students to let them go to Columbia College for free. This is ridiculous. I cannot, if I watch one more, what is the other guy? Dold and Young and Schneider, and I don't even know who the hell they are. I live on the South Side. I've got nothing to do. I got Bobby Rush. That's it. You know? I can't. There's nobody even running against Bobby Rush as far as I know. Some Republican's going to get 3 votes from, you know, Harvey or something. But honest to gosh, I mean, billions and billions of dollars being spent on the Tammy Duckworth, Joe Walsh, or whatever his name is. I mean, I can't stand it anymore. It's ridiculous. And the kinds of money we spend on the president. I mean, you're lucky you don't live in Ohio. Yeah. You live in Ohio or Florida, you'd be getting bombed every day. I mean, it's to the point where you'd vote libertarian because you don't want to vote for these two guys. It gets you sick after a while. Every time the phone rings, hi, this is Mitt Romney. Actually, could have been George, his father, for all I know. Hi, and I hang up on that, then hi, this is Barack Obama. Hi, and this is, Kirk. I don't care anymore. The robocalls, it takes the spirit out of the real competition, which ought to be over ideas and over real public policy. And it saddens me.
I only wish it were George.
Yeah. Sheila, and then we have another question.
I just wanted to say, young people, do something about that.
Yeah.
Do something about that. My generation hasn't done very well trying to change that, but it's not too late to change it.
He gave us the Beatles. And Woodstock, which I heard was pretty good.
And the Supremes. But.
Yeah. All right. Sharon's over here with another question.
Well, I kind of have a follow-up to that question, or to the comment that you just said. There is a trend, or there's kind of this popular thought, and this is another reason why I feel like a lot of young voters didn't vote in the election this year, is that if at the end of the day the candidates are just puppets to bigger corporations, then what's the point of us getting out there and voting? Does our vote really even count? And what do you have to say to those people who think like that?
There was an election back in 1968. There was a man named Richard, let me tell you a story. There was a man named Richard Milhouse Nixon. He won by less than 1% of the popular vote against Hubert, happy to be there, Humphrey, okay? Had Hubert Humphrey been elected president, it would have been a much different world. I think that in 2000, there were 354 Chads hanging someplace in Florida. Before Florida, I thought the only Chad I knew was Chad and Jeremy. I think it's very important that you vote, because if you don't vote, you lose your... Back in 1964, there was a thing called Freedom Summer. And a lot of people went down to the South and fought so that blacks could get votes. And 3 kids got killed, right? Actually, more than those 3, but those 3, Goodwin, Shermer, and so forth, made the front page. People have died for the vote in this country. And I think it absolutely pains me when people say they don't believe in the vote, because but for that vote, Richard Nixon would not have been president. But for that vote, somebody else might have been president. And it just pains me.
Well,
so
but despite the vote, Bush became president.
Well, and that's why, because they controlled the Supreme Court and they controlled Florida. And, I mean, there has to be, look, the American Revolution is fought every generation. All men created equal means one thing in 1776. It means all white men with property. Later, African Americans become citizens, but they're not given the vote. Later, women, become citizens fully 1920. Women don't get the vote till 1920. I mean, every generation has to decide what the American Revolution's about. It's your turn. I'm tired.
Let's hear from Tom down there. Mayor Emanuel kicked them out of the park.
Following up on Sheila's point about getting involved, I think it's very important to understand, especially for young people to understand, the role of the corporation in basically controlling all of our institutions, including our educational institutions. The whole world is about corporate sponsors, and basically we're getting to a point where we're not even talking about 1%, we're talking about 0.1%, basically controlling the rest of the population, again, having people vote against their interests, people drop out of, of the process altogether. It's all by design. The $6 billion or $5 billion that you're talking about, that's all by design. And the people who profit from that are the corporations who continue to control you and every other institution. They control the educational institutions, the religious institutions, government. And so if you're going to make an effort to correct that, you need to understand what you're fighting. And what you're fighting is getting stronger and stronger every day. We're heading to this kind of plutocracy where you've got control taking place by people who are preaching nationalism and individualism, and they're actually practicing globalism, and they're practicing collective cooperation amongst them. And you have to understand how we are being played in order to basically deal with that. And certainly, it's not just Republicans; it's the whole system. We are all dependent on that next sponsor, and the only way you can start combating that is trying to basically understand the importance of collectivism, getting together and uniting to fight that situation, that system.
Must reading for every class at Columbia, as far as I'm concerned, is Naomi Klein's No Logo. Corporate globalization is the real enemy. We've got, Florida has not yet been called, neither has Ohio or Virginia, but Obama has Connecticut, Maine, Delaware, Rhode Island, Maryland, Massachusetts, Illinois, the District of Connecticut, D.C., Washington, D.C., and Vermont. No surprises. Romney has Indiana, Kentucky, West Virginia, Tennessee, Georgia, and it breaks my heart to say it, Oklahoma, the home of the Flaming Lips, and Will Rogers. You know, what's wrong with Oklahoma? Man, I spent a lot of time in Oklahoma writing about the Flaming Lips. We had another question?
Yes. What can the public do to ensure items such as NDAA and Occupy are given agency in our current political discourse? What can the public do to ensure items such as NDAA and Occupy are given agency in our current discourse?
Take advantage of social media.
It is interesting that the Democrats did not reach out to Occupy the way the Republicans did to the Tea Party. In any way,
to the contrary, the Obama administration helped crush Occupy. We know that. You know, we know how the Justice Department helped coordinate raids in all the different cities. You know, when Occupy was really at its height, I used to go on Twitter every night and see which cities Occupy was being crushed that night, and it was the exact same story in the middle of the night, so there'd be no media coverage. There was a whole strategy laid out, and it's been reported. But to your question, I think the question is, why haven't we seen this reported in any of the mainstream coverage? I mean, the NDAA is one hell of a piece of legislation. That's like the Patriot Act on steroids. I mean, I don't think, and you can learn about it in a lot of sources, but you don't learn about it in the Chicago Tribune. If you were, or the Sun-Times, or even the Evening News, if you were to do a search on those, you won't find anything in those places about it. And because the president wasn't primaried, it was never a part of the debate in the campaign. It was completely ignored. And I don't know if people understand the level of it's the Bush security policy. You know, ProPublica is an example of a media outlet that has done a lot of work on this. The Bush national security agenda and strategy that Obama was elected in part to put an end to, he's multiplied that 100-fold. It's like Dick Cheney's wet dream, you know? And most Americans have no idea that this is going on, the kind of warrantless spying, mass surveillance, like, as I mentioned before, the drone wars, people still being held at Gitmo without charges. And so to answer your question, there's got to be, you just have to keep trying to apply pressure to get it into the media. And as was set up here, you know, bypassing the media, but as much as you bypass the media and social media and so on, there's still nothing like getting it into the discourse. I mean, it's not in the debates, it's not in the campaigns, it's as if it's not happening at all.
I think that's true. I think one of the biggest, we talk about the internet providing you all sorts of ways and means to fact check something, and it's very true. But along with this fact checking of a sort comes this whole strategy of scooting past the big story. And that's where you're headed with the big story. So I believe that I think that recently here in Chicago, after a big play right when it happened, the protests surrounding the NATO summit, I mean, there was an awful lot more to bring up about the NATO summit and the protests and the relationship of electoral politics to all of that. So the fact that this immense motorcade can go just so far as we know, knew nothing about the protest or anything that was being said, came from O'Hare to McCormick Place, that limitations were accepted, and they went right back down the Kennedy to O'Hare in their immense motorcade. Did they register anything? They might as well have been meeting in Trinidad or anywhere else you want to mention. They might have had more trouble in Shanghai. I think this is a real kind of survival philosophy. I believe that's the way they approach it in the main media, of avoiding, scooting past the big story, maybe giving it a glance, but not really going out to explore it. So.
It's less about scooting past the big story. Who's deciding what the big story is?
Well,
and where are you in deciding what the big story is? We aren't hearing from you.
I don't want you to go away with a broken heart and with no spirit, okay? Because I remember back in 1963, there were 7 black elected officials in the old Confederacy. I believe today there are 1,300. That's a big difference. That's what the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party did. That's what Freedom Summer did. They didn't give up because there were dogs and people ignored them and people didn't write stories about them and people said, oh my God, they're radical. We're not going to talk about them. They kept it up. And that's what you got to do. Now maybe I'm just an old white romantic. But I got to remember those days, and I remember how much of a difference they made. And because of those days, there's a black man in the White House right now. Because of those days, someday there'll be a woman in the White House, maybe in 4 years. Because of those days, we've gone through tremendous change. And that's important. There was no black Supreme Court justice in 1962.
They did get attention.
They did get attention, and they made change. It happened. It happened. It took time. What we don't understand, it's like the labor union movement. You know, labor union, we don't want Walmart. But we need jobs on the South Side. People are hungry. Let Walmart come in. Then let's organize the bastards. Let's organize them. Nobody went to Armour & Company in 1938 and said, oh, let's get rid of Armour & Company. No, they organized the workers. They formed unions. They did stuff. This is what you got to do. It's your turn. Do it.
Exactly. And it wasn't the mainstream press either.
No,
so
it never is.
Correct.
Yeah. Well, everyone. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt you, John. So a lot of people have been like going around today screaming about you should vote, you should vote, you should vote. And there was an interview a couple months back with Lupe Fiasco, and he was talking about why he doesn't vote and why he believes in working in the communities and building up the communities and building out from there instead of, you know, going through the voting process, because he feels that it's a spectacle. Basically, you know, like last night, Barack Obama was in Ohio with Jay-Z and like Bruce Springsteen, and like Mitt Romney was interviewed on ESPN, and it was just like this ludicrous, like this whole campaign year has just been like, it's funny. Like I watched the campaign a couple months back, and it's just like that. Like it's ludicrous, like just nonsense all around. So you guys are, you know, encouraging people to vote, but do you feel that there's more power in the voting process or trying to build up a sense of community and trying to build up, you know, from there? So which one do you think is more?
Well, the latter is probably the most important. It's the place where you should begin. There's no, I mean, voting, it's really comparatively easy. You go to a precinct and you vote and you feel good about it, or you feel useless about it. I mean, statistically, anybody's vote is insignificant. But that was not what they were fighting for, as Dominic was earlier mentioned, in the American Revolution. It makes a huge difference. What really can make a difference is again, what was mentioned about the revolution that occurred in the South in the late 50s and early and mid 60s. where the organizing was a main factor. But all of those organizers will testify that wherever they could get media attention, they had comparative safety. Comparative, I say. There's a woman back there somewhere, Sonia Smalley, who walked the walk. I'm talking about walking down this road right to the school, you know, with these people demeaning you on all sides, cursing you and so forth. But wherever you could get media attention to those things, people would hold back. And it's unfortunate for Schwimmer and Goodman and Cheney that there was no one there.
Well, you know, and as we studied in our careers in writing class, right, there are tools today that they didn't have in '63 and in '64. You know, to be able to put up your cell phone and capture that racist pig of a cop, right, threatening you, and to be able to capture Romney talking when he thinks he isn't being heard and saying 47%, or Obama lying and showing us what really happened in the middle of the night in Grant Park when they decided to clean up, Occupy. These are powerful tools that did not exist. You guys are taking this for granted, you know? I mean, because you haven't lived in a life without the internet, but the tools at our disposal, you have nothing that the New York Times has nothing that you don't have in your pocket on this stupid machine. That's really powerful.
Well, I wanted to also say, I think what Jim said is right, because I think for as much as I admire and respect the stories of what happened in the 60s, those strategies are pretty shop-worn today. And it's, you know, getting out there and protesting is something that gets easily marginalized by the media. Oh, it's just a bunch of protesters. It's the same old people carrying signs, and it doesn't get you that far. But I follow Lupe Fiasco, and when he was going through that tweeting conversation, I threw in one which is that your vote is much too valuable to waste on Obama or Romney. I mean, people died for this vote, right? So why? See, I agree more with, I think, what you're saying. Voting for Obama or Romney, you know, especially in Illinois, you know, in the old Soviet Union, there was one name on a ballot, you know. In Cook County, there's one name, and in a presidential election, there's two, who are, as I think we've all agreed, controlled by corporations. Voting is just about the least thing you can do in a democracy as far as I'm concerned. So this whole, like, get out there and vote, you know, that's just what they want you to do. You know, like, I'm not really into that idea. I think it's far more important, as Lupe Fiasco was saying, is to get involved on your own. And to go back to an earlier question, is to look at third parties and independent parties, look at local races, aldermen. I thought it was great when Rhymefest ran for alderman, and maybe someone like that can get in next time, and more people can get in, and look at the local races and that sort of thing. It's not just all about who wins the White House. If it was all, I think that's something that is always pushed down on everyone. If the most important thing was who was in the White House, well, tell that to the Tea Party caucus in the House, right? Haven't they been running the country the last 2 years? I mean, so I think the vote, frankly, is overrated.
Well, evidence of that is the MTV Rock the Vote campaign, which came to Columbia College, sponsored by a violent video game and an energy drink, and registered voters 3 days after Illinois' deadline had passed for voter registration. Nobody knew that until I wrote the story.
You need to get involved, and you need to vote. If you don't, Rhymefest can run all he wants to, but if you're not out there voting for him, just as the last time, he will not win.
What happens with these guys, Rhymefest and Lupe, is that they gain so much exposure through media, and then they don't manage to get as far as they think they should get, and then they retract. They, you know, and I agree that one does not mean that you don't do the other. You can do both, and I've had this conversation, you know, with at least with Rhymefest, you know, and the fact that he needs to use his power as a media messenger to reach broad numbers of people while he's still working in the community on a grassroots, you know, level. But it's really a shame for him to withdraw and for Lupe to withdraw to this kind of nuclear kind of community thing and not share his persuasive powers with the rest of the
It's understandable,
world.
though. I mean, the hatchet job that the Chicago Sun-Times did on Rhymefest. You know, I called up my former colleagues who wrote that story, and I lost lifelong friendships because of it. I said, you guys were so wrong. I can't believe it. You know, and Lupe's been marginalized, too. These are speakers of truth. Lupe had the critique you made, Steve. He called President Obama a terrorist, and then went on to very smartly, in his lyrics, criticize the droning program. Great stuff.
Hi. So I was at Occupy Chicago last year. I started going on like the 8th day that they were protesting in front of the Fed and everything like that. And while I was there, they were having us submit ideas on their website for things in the country that we wanted changed. And one of the things that I brought up was the Electoral College and whether or not it is even necessary anymore. And my problem with the Electoral College is that these delegates for each state are not elected. They are appointed by the parties, and those are the people that basically choose our next president of the United States. They're the ones whose vote really counts in the election. And yes, most of the time they do choose for their party, but they don't have to. They have the option to choose the other candidate. So I guess my question would be, do you think that the Electoral College is necessary these days, or do you think it's something that the media has made necessary through their constant coverage and their giant maps and everything of all the states, and they're like, oh, this person has won this state, and so he gets this many electoral votes?
I've always thought reporters hate it. I thought they just want, you know.
Technically, the Electoral College, the people who they were originally set up to be a counter to democratic excesses. The main thing people writing the Constitution had in mind, and most of them did, was Shays' Rebellion in western Massachusetts, which really shook them up. This was the common people expressing themselves in a pretty big way. And so they said, we got to do something. We got to get rid of these Articles of Confederation, and we got to do something that will organize the country and take advantage of the popular resentments and the popular interests, and at the same time maintain the authority of property and money and so forth. In some ways, Abigail Adams, who is the wife of one of the major participants in that whole area, John Adams, she wrote her husband and said basically it is pretty ironical that a bunch of slave-holding white men get together and write a constitution in which they call it all men are created equal, or what have you, you know. So, but actually with the Electoral College, it is a danger at times, and could be this time. It could be. In fact, it's come to the point where, yes, they have technically the right to vote their conscience, so to speak, when they get there, but they would do so at the risk of life and limb in their party, their communities, and so forth. So,
you know, going back to that.
But at the same time, it might have saved us a lot of trouble if we had not had the Electoral College in year 2000.
Two quick things, Dom. Going back to that power of Twitter, somebody in this room just tweeted Jim Derogatis called Indiana stupid, and you don't want me to read the message I got from an Indiana person just now. I ain't going there to buy fireworks no more.
Indiana wants you, but you can't go back there.
You know? I can't go by R. Kelly's house. I can't go to Indiana. Also, Romney has won Alabama, surprising no one. Dom.
The Electoral College is not a creation of the media. Let's make that perfectly clear. It's a creation of the founding fathers, as John points out. The other thing is, of course, you know, in the 18th century, it took a long time to get down to Washington to vote for president, and that's why this was done. You couldn't all, you know, we didn't have the internet, we didn't have telephones, and so forth and so on. It's an 18th century idea. It ought to be done away with. I agree 100%. This 2000 election, when Gore won the popular and Bush won the Electoral College, the French said, what a strange country. You know, I mean, what a strange country. This would not have happened in France or Poland or Russia. It just wouldn't have happened. So it's an 18th century invention that ought to be done away with. I agree with you 100%. The only way it's going to get, I'll tell you how it'll get done away with. If Obama wins the Electoral College and he loses the popular vote tonight, the Republicans will say, let's get rid of it, and they'll get rid of it.
That's the way we got Obamacare.
Yes! That's right. That's true. And it might happen. Yeah.
So my question has something to do with the previous question. We were just talking about the Electoral College. The entire voting process, are you happy with it? Obviously not happy with the Electoral College part, but the entire process, if you could restructure it from the ground up, how would you and why?
Well, no, there are actually a lot of electoral reforms that get talked about and could be enacted, particularly in Chicago and Illinois, where it takes unusually high amounts of signatures compared to a lot of other places to get on the ballot. So, I mean, the game here is really rigged from the start. And so there's all another electoral form that you might want to see in Chicago is that you might recall under Richard Daley, when an alderman resigned or went to jail or took another job, he got to appoint the replacement. And at one point, more than half of the city council had just simply been appointed by the mayor. So there are ballot access issues, and there are issues with whether vacancies are filled by appointments.
Citizens United.
There's campaign finance reform and others. And
Well, I was just going to expand. Were you done?
No, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to expand on a point that Steve just made regarding ballot access. One of the things that I would love to see, and it does happen in parts of our country, though not consistently anywhere that I can remember, and that is that you are able to vote online in some places. Mm-hmm.
Same-day registration.
Same-day registration, exactly. So today you could have said, I want to vote. I'm going to go register. I'm going to go vote. You couldn't do that here.
That's very true. Bring about some order to the electoral process, so there weren't so many jurisdictions affecting how it's done, where just a state can make rules concerning voting. A city can do that, a county can do that, and then it takes the federal government to override it. I mean, 1920 was not the first time that women were allowed to vote. In 1867, Wyoming extended the vote to women, and they did that with an ulterior motive. There were all these bachelors running around here in the hard-fought West who wanted to get married. And so they thought they would try to tempt the women to come out to Wyoming. So, so it does need. I would say, if you suspect that it needs a complete overhaul, you're quite right. But there's some models here. They tried to cope with this in Europe, and they did it partly by restricting the amount of time that people could campaign. I believe it's 6 weeks in Germany, and there's some restrictions in France too. There's also a heavy restriction on the amount of money that can become involved in the campaigns. All of this would be enormously helpful in this country. But that's a major political undertaking, because there are people with really heavy investments in the way this mess is a mess. And so, go ahead.
For one thing, it puts well over $2 billion into the pockets of the corporations through advertising.
That's creating jobs.
Yeah, that's the job creator. Right.
We have time for
stimulus.
We have 2 more questions, and then we're wrapping up.
Hello. That was squeaky. Okay. So I am a sophomore in high school, and this year I have to take U.S. history. And one of the things I'm noticing with U.S. history, and because, we start all the way back right when America was founded, I'm noticing how, old things are. And the Electoral College, it was founded originally, the whole point of it was because they didn't trust the people to vote. And, we're talking about a time when, women couldn't vote, and African-American people, all these people couldn't vote unless you were a crotchety white old man. And then we slowly graduated from that. And, women fought for the right to vote, and people died for the right to vote, which is very important. But these things happened a really long time ago. And just as Jesus died for our sins, and, people are like, oh, well, don't sin because, Jesus died for our sins. But people sin every day. I was wondering if you guys thought that maybe the Electoral College and voting, because you guys said that voting was important because, people fought for these rights. But I was wondering if you guys thought maybe it is a little outdated, and maybe not voting is outdated, but in a new nation, as you guys were saying, that's based off lies. Obama lies, Romney lies. I'm sure independent party people lie. Maybe if there's a new definition of voting, and I was just wondering if you guys had any thoughts on that.
Well, I think, there's a lot of dictators in the world who don't like voting. That's a good thing. Stalin probably didn't like it that much. Hitler, perhaps a few others. I think it's important, and it remains important, even though it might be, democracy's a messy, dirty thing. It really is. Democracy was created for a few landowners in Athens back before Jesus was around. By the way, Jesus is a Green candidate.
God bless America.
God bless America. And it was, just 200 guys would get in the square and yell, Stephakeles, he's the guy. Let's make him, the head of Athens. Well, we can't do that because we've got 300 million people. And it's really difficult to count 300 million people. It's difficult for me, as some of my students are in the audience, for me to figure out my grades for 20 people, right? But for 300,000 people, 300 million people, it's a huge thing. But we do have the technology, and it might not work perfectly. But I don't think there's a better system right now. I'd like to see a better system that hasn't taken away the voice of people like, the guy who's talking about Occupy Chicago.
Dom, I don't want to belittle what Sheila was saying earlier about suppressing anybody's right to vote, but I do sometimes wonder if there should be, you need a license to drive, there should be a really basic test to allow you to vote. Name a president of the United States of America. Doesn't even have to be the current one.
Would you like a literacy test for guys? Come on.
How many houses of Congress?
64.
How many houses of, it's just...
The worst presidents have gone to Ivy League schools.
But it just scares me that the Octomom's vote matters as much as any of yours.
The best presidents went to a place in West Texas, Teachers College, but never mind.
But there might be other better systems on the globe. Maybe a parliamentary system. I happen to think the two-party system is killing us.
Can you use the microphone?
I was, there might be a better systems in the world, like maybe a parliamentary system, or the kind of systems that are used in a lot of countries in Western Europe or Australia or other places, because I happen to think that the two-party system is really killing us in America, and that's it's not in the Constitution, it's not required, and the two parties are they're really private corporations of their own, and they control everything. The debates, they control who gets to get into those debates. Not every candidate on the ballot, not every candidate for president on your ballot today was in those debates. And who that's probably why the Electoral College is still around. They probably find some advantage in only having to compete in a few swing states and so on and so forth. So I don't know that we necessarily have the best system.
ABC 7 has just called that the House will retain in Republican control, so not going anywhere fast.
I think you have to develop an appreciation of irony. It's true. Your vote is statistically insignificant. You might as well face it. It is statistically insignificant as you alone voting. But you voting with quite a number of other people is quite a different matter. And it becomes a real test of the possibility of where the country can go. Churchill had a comment about that. I'm not always the greatest fan of Churchill, but he said, well, everything they say, all the criticism of democracy is true. They just haven't come up with a better system. So a part of it is, I think an appreciation of irony in all of this can get you through a lot of problems, or it certainly helped me get through a lot of problems.
Not ironic at all, Steve. Jesse Jackson Jr. has been reelected.
He has been?
Yes. Stop the presses.
I tell you, the hospital bed is the best place to campaign from.
That's a good. Now everybody's going to try it next year.
Okay.
All right. This is the last one.
Oh, well.
We have to go home and watch TV.
Okay. My question, of course, I want to hear the gentleman's thoughts, is more directed towards Sheila. I think as a young woman, I was kind of put off by the conversation that was being thrown back and forth about women's rights in this year's election year. And I really just wanted to hear your thoughts about that. Do you feel like it was a ploy to try to get women's attention and kind of exploit their...
You mean Wyoming's ploy?
Well, are you talking about Wisconsin with...
The suffrage to women before the 1920, but that was one of the main forces. I just saw a picture of Theodore Roosevelt campaigning, and when I looked at the audience, more than half of them were women. It was, and that was 1912. So it sometimes takes a huge push from all parts of the society to actually get something like a constitutional amendment passed.
But were you talking specifically about, you can't get pregnant from a rape and you...
I mean, there's been a lot of issues when it comes to women's rights and equality, but including the repeal of equal pay in Wisconsin.
Oh, yeah.
But mostly I'm referencing the circulation around reproductive rights and rights of our own body.
I think that was the best gift the Democrats got this year, was the stupid things that were said about a woman's right to her own body.
And Jim, I agree. Yes, I agree with Jim, but you know what? We talk about this a lot. We're tired of men talking about this.
Amen. Amen, amen, amen.
Let me ask this question. Why isn't that showing up more in the polls? I mean, why isn't it?
I think I can answer that, because I'm hearing from a lot of women that they don't really believe that, I will use Mr. Romney in this example, that Mr. Romney really believes what he's saying. He's only saying it. Well, yes, and he's only saying it to achieve what his goal ultimately is.
But he has magic underwear. The Mormon magic underwear. You know about that?
I'm just saying. I'm just saying. So yes, a ploy. And because they don't because these women don't believe it. They're willing to vote for him, they say, because they aren't worried that he's really going to follow through, which is darn scary.
I mean, that's one of the major ironies of this whole lying thing.
That word again.
You know, you lie and you change positions, and so then you get belief-based reality. You know, based on whatever people want to believe, they say, well, that's what. Wow, that's
Oh, Obama has won Pennsylvania. That was key.
Oh, that's big.
That was not too much of a surprise, though. But they made a big push there in the last couple of days, Republicans. All right, are we done, Sharon?
I think we're done.
We're done. We have to go home and actually watch some results.